Welcome to Beer and Baseball, a Myrtle Beach Pelicans production. I am your host, Adam Dellinger, but before we get to today's pod, here are a few housekeeping notes. First off, this is a new podcast, so the more you share, the more listeners we obtain. Where can you listen, you might ask? Soon to be on the iHeart Podcast Network and also on the Myrtle Beach Pelicans YouTube channel. Listen, subscribe, review, 5 stars would be great, and share. That's all we ask. Now, let's go.
Well, here we go, guys. Welcome to Beer and Baseball, where we talk about, well, beer and baseball. Even though for some reason beer rarely comes up on this podcast, which I'm fine with because I love both equally. And today is going to be baseball laden, if you will. My name is Adam Dellinger, and I've got my buddy Jon. I am going to let Jon tell you a little bit about what it is that he does. I've been excited about this one for a really long time. Can't wait to do it. Jon, thank you so much for joining us, man.
Adam, it's an absolute pleasure to reconnect and to get on the Beer and Baseball cast. I've seen a few episodes, and you guys do an awesome job. So thank you for having me. And I'm broadcasting and beaming into you straight from Cooperstown, New York. And any baseball fan, probably most Americans know what Cooperstown means. It stands for excellence. It stands for baseball greatness, and it also stands for beautiful Americana. And I am privileged to serve at the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum as Vice President of Communications and Education, and in those roles help to steer this institution towards the fulfillment of our mission, which ultimately boils down to 3 key pieces: preserving the game's history, honoring our all-time greats, and connecting generations of baseball fans together. It's 17 years, maybe 18 years in baseball now, and I just could not be more thrilled to be able to represent this fine institution here in beautiful Cooperstown, New York.
Jon Shestakofsky is, that's right, folks, baseball nerds. He is in Cooperstown. He works at the Hall of Fame. I don't really understand where to even go with this, where to start. We do have some specific points that we want to mention, but if you're geeking out a little bit like I am, I'm going to try to ask all the questions that maybe you would like to ask if you got a chance to talk to Jon right now. I'm going to go ahead and start by mentioning that you guys are operating with a limited capacity right now, and I heard you mention the idea of, everybody gets a stylus now so they can use that to check out some of the interactive exhibits. Is there anything seasonal specific, like a one-off exhibit or anything right now you'd like to talk about that you guys have?
The best thing about a visit to Cooperstown now is going to be the fall foliage. This is just an awesome time to come here to the village. Our temperatures are very comfortable, sunny days, and just a beautiful, beautiful place to be. I tell people that they're going to love coming to Cooperstown, and almost just as much as being here in the village, the drive from the airport or from another city into the village is just another part of that journey and that experience. Here in the museum right now, we have all of our exhibit spaces running in a fully functional way, which is terrific. We reopened after being closed 102 days, which, by the way, we're never in a typical year closed more than 3 days a year. So 102 was a pretty significant time for us to be closed, and we're here to celebrate the game, and we thrive on folks being in this museum and being able to see that passion and share our passion for baseball. So we reopened end of June, and as you mentioned, have a number of safety protocols in place. We have limited capacity in place, but everyone that enters now gets one of these little stylus pens, rubber tip pen, allow you to use all of our interactive exhibit spaces, touch screens and buttons, and be as safe as possible in the museum. So going strong, all of our 3 floors of exhibit spaces, about a dozen exhibits in total, are open and functional, and folks are enjoying coming through.
Jon, this is the question that I was asked if I wanted to have you on doing this particular podcast. And the first question that I thought of is the one that I'm going to ask right now. At the end of your illustrious career, and it is time for you to retire, Jon. And your service to not only Cooperstown, but to baseball in general is to be lauded because of all the things you did to move the game forward. We are going to give you as a retirement gift one item that you can take from the Hall of Fame to put in your living room in this multiverse scenario that we're doing right now. What's the coolest thing in the place, man?
And this is not a cop-out because I'm going to get to an answer, but what I love about baseball is that everyone has their own perspective. You know, we get a lot of Yankee fans in here, and for me, you know, I come from Boston and worked for the Red Sox before coming here. I still think it's the number one artifact, the coolest thing that we have in our collection that I tell everyone, you've got to see this thing before you leave. It is a Babe Ruth bat. And of course, Babe Ruth still, you know, all these years later, probably the biggest name in baseball. It's a bat that he used in 1927, which was a year in which he set a record with 60 home runs. We think about bats now as, you know, kind of, I don't want to say disposable, but you know, a major league player is only going to use a bat for a certain number of games. This, you know, nowadays when it breaks, maybe it doesn't feel right. Babe Ruth used this bat that's on display for what must have been about half of the season. And this piece of lumber is solid. But the coolest thing about it, it was the year he hit 60 home runs to rewrite the record books and set a new all-time record. He actually took a little razor blade. Every time he hit a home run with this bat, he made a little notch on this bat right around the trademark where it says Louisville Slugger. And guess how many notches ended up on this bat, Adam?
I don't know. So
28 little notches surrounding this surrounding the trademark on this bat. He used it like that, and so that means he hit 28 of his 60 home runs that year using this one piece of lumber. And I just love this piece because it hits so many different storylines. And you know, here at the Hall of Fame, we are storytellers. That's our primary role. We're here to reconnect people with the game's history, make sure the stories of the game don't get lost. And when an artifact like this can tell the story of not only, you know, baseball history in the, you know, the days of its continuing growth towards from national pastime, but also, you know, the game's all-time celebrity, the story of home run records, and the story of bats and how bats are used, and kind of that equipment piece all together. And how cool is it? Just from, you think of a fighter pilot's plane that has marks of how many enemies they've taken care of. It's kind of the same thing, and it just tells a really neat story about Babe Ruth and his place in history, his well-deserved place in history. So for me, that's great, but I do have the caveat of there's 30 different teams, you know, untold number of favorite players out there. We have 333 Hall of Fame members who are celebrated in our plaque gallery. And you can everyone comes in with their own perspective. So my favorite artifact and what I would put on my mantelpiece might be completely different from, you know, yours or anyone else that comes through. And that's the beauty of this experience, and trying to have a tailored experience for every single person that comes into this museum.
I'm going to give mine just because I always have to host a podcast and nobody ever asks me questions. So I'm just going to pose my own question to myself. I would assume, and I could be way off here, but in 1941, when Ted Williams ended the season at 406, played a doubleheader that day, and it's my favorite baseball story of all time. He would have batted over 400 had he not played that day anyways, but he decided to go out and play in the doubleheader. I think he was 6 for 8 that day and ended the season at 406. The last player to bat over 400. Is that bat from that doubleheader in the Hall of Fame?
Gosh, I'm trying to look it up. I don't know if that bat is in the Hall of Fame, but one of my other favorite bats in our collection is a Ted Williams bat. And I can tell you a little bit about the story behind that one, if you'd like.
Yes, please, absolutely, man.
Now I'm going to butcher the years and all that stuff, but this bat was a bat that Ted Williams used in an All-Star game when he faced Satchel Paige, and he actually struck out using this bat, and he was frustrated having struck out in an All-Star game, and he brought the bat back to the dugout and smashed it. And now it might not even be an All-Star game, it might have been a regular season game. He kind of smashed the bat a little bit. When you look at it, it has dents on it. There's the part of the knob of the bat has broken off, and someone had the foresight to collect this and offered it to us, offered it to the Hall of Fame. And so it lives on here as a really interesting piece that shows not only the passion that Ted Williams had for the game, the standard that he kept himself up to, but that interconnection with him and Satchel Paige. And we actually can identify the exact day that this is from because it was the only time he struck out against Paige. He had a couple hits. He didn't have a great batting average, but then you kind of take it to the future, and it was Ted Williams who, when he was inducted, I believe 1963, went out of his way as part of his Hall of Fame induction speech here in Cooperstown to talk about Negro Leagues players and the fact that they deserve recognition in the Hall of Fame alongside all the other greats of the game that have been elected like himself. So you kind of do the here in the moment, a guy like Satchel Paige who had to start his career in the Negro Leagues. Ted Williams faced him, struck out against him because, again, Paige is one of the all-time greatest pitchers of all time. And then the respect down the line to start to make that desire clear that he thinks they need to be included alongside everyone else who are represented here at the Hall of Fame. And those words are attributed to making a difference and opening the door to Negro Leagues players here in Cooperstown.
You know, it's interesting that you told the story behind that bat. You told the story behind the speech at his induction there on the grounds about Ted Williams. And we could talk all day long, John, I guess, about, well, look, there's King Griffey Jr.'s cleats, or there's Joe Morgan's glove, or, a game-worn Yankees cap that came off the Knicks' head or whatever, right? We can talk about all of the actual artifacts, but baseball, I believe, and only baseball has this, and people can argue about it in the comments, but I believe that only baseball has that piece of Americana in which we relate the artifact to a specific story in a specific place and time, even, a microcosm such as you relate that particular artifact to an individual singular moment in history. We do that in baseball. And you mentioned Americana there in the open. All of the uniqueness surrounding the Hall of Fame is incredible. And I love to hear you talk about the induction speech. Now, with your time at the Hall of Fame, tell us what it feels like to see those, to be at an induction speech.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. And like you were saying, it's something special about baseball. And I think there is no Cooperstown without baseball. Cooperstown and what it represents is only possible because of baseball and what baseball represents in our culture. There's a difference between baseball and football, and baseball and hockey and basketball. For whatever reason, baseball grew up with America. From the Civil War, that's the Civil War era, really is when baseball coalesced into being our national pastime. And by the early 1900s, it was our pastime. Baseball was the biggest thing. The biggest celebrities of our country were ball players. And there's something that's tied uniquely this country's history with this game itself. And maybe that's why baseball has always been kind of held to a higher standard in terms of the way people associated with the game are expected to do the right thing on and off the field, and kind of because the game has been so long standing and played the same way over such a long period of time, it really does allow us to imagine that history, to put ourselves in the shoes of seeing a guy like Babe Ruth, and we can really feel what it would have been like to watch him step to the plate. It's the same game that it was. It really is, and all that combined together makes this game so special, makes Cooperstown what it is. And that plays into the induction speeches. It really does. I've been here 4 years now, and it's really the most, I guess, heartwarming moment of the year is when we have these induction speeches. Our induction ceremonies take place about a mile down the road in a big field, and every electee has that opportunity to deliver. It's really, I try and tell the guys when they're preparing their speeches, this is your moment. It's your moment to talk about, yes, you need to thank the right people. You need to make sure you don't forget mentioning someone who really should be mentioned. But it's the time to think about your message. What do you want people to remember about your career? What do you want people to think about? What your, not only your place in the game, but how you got there. What are the important attributes, and why is it that you made it this far? So you really see some amazing from the heart moments, and the tears flow, and it's just a beautiful thing to see. And with all the tens of thousands of fans who come to visit and be a part of that moment, it's one of the most special pieces of the baseball schedule. And we're so lucky to be able to have it here in Cooperstown.
I met a guy in town here, and I'm in Myrtle Beach. I'm going to transition to Myrtle Beach here in just a moment, but I do have one more question because you interact with so many people. And I understand I host a radio show, so I've talked about this on the podcast before. I meet singers, songwriters, artists, the occasional celebrity or whatever pretty regularly, and you can become a little bit jaded to that. Now, with that said, I don't know if the accent gives it away or not, but I was born in Braves country, and I'm a living, breathing member of the Chop On crowd, dude. I'm a huge Braves fan. And I met a guy last week that is really good friends and went to high school with Greg Maddux. They still talk. He's a guy that played football at Purdue, but went to the same high school as Greg Maddux. And I'm geeking out over the deal. And, for me, a trip to Cooperstown is, I'm going straight to Maddux, Glavine, Smoltz, Chipper, Hank Aaron, Dale Murphy one day, hopefully. And I'm going in that specific direction because that's what, I'm attracted to. Like you were saying earlier about how everybody's got different reasons that they come. You're in a position to which you have interacted with a lot of legendary human beings, man. And is there anybody, like, who's the one player that you interact with, player, manager, person around baseball, where it was just difficult for you and, like, it was just, you were in awe, basically?
Well, Adam, like you mentioned, you kind of, 15, 17 years of working in baseball, over time, you kind of get used to being around folks that, normally you'd be in awe of. And it still happens to me outside of baseball. Oh my gosh, celebrity, TV, whatever. That's kind of neat. But the baseball world doesn't faze me in that same way. But like you said, it all goes back to how you, like, when you grew up, what team you were following, who was your guy. And for me, growing up when I did in Boston, Pedro Martinez was the man. He still is the man, but
yes, he is.
I mean, this guy took Boston by storm. Just absolutely dominant. Some of the singular moments and the career as a whole. And you throw the person in there as well. He's just an amazingly his personality is so overwhelmingly positive, and he's just brings so much to the table just as a person sitting there talking. So, in Boston, I used to say this in Boston too, and it carries over here. My heart still skips a beat a little bit or flutters a little bit when Pedro Martinez is up here in Cooperstown or I see him around. It just means something different to me because he's the guy that I grew up watching and idolizing as, perhaps the best pitcher I will ever see in my lifetime. So that's like for you coming up and seeing all the Braves. For me, he's the guy, and I don't know it's ever going to go away.
How old are you, if you don't mind me asking, John?
37.
I'm also 37. The reason I ask this question is because I have a brother who is 23. My brother's 23. And we have had heated arguments because I have to tell him Pedro Martinez, most dominant right-handed pitcher that I have seen in my lifetime. And when I was a little boy, I caught the tail end of Nolan Ryan with the Rangers. He still had one more no-hitter to throw when I was a kid, right? I remember when he got his 7th no-hitter. I was a little boy. My dad talked about it. But for my money, from like 1990, I don't know, 6, 7, somewhere in there to 2005, if Pedro was pitching, there was a high likelihood he might have 15 strikeouts on any given night. Random Tuesday in Milwaukee, say, right? Like he could have 15 strikeouts. That was a real thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the transition, I know the people producing the podcast that are watching are really hoping I don't get off on one of these. I'm going to talk about how awesome baseball players are tangents because I'll derail the podcast. So let me move on now.
No, but I love it. Listen, they might not like it, but I love it. It's it's awesome.
I think that they don't get angry about it at all by any means, but I think that I can get off on these tangents. And Pedro Martinez is one that I could talk about. Actually, the entire Martinez family, if you really want to get into it, like if you really want to go that level, that was the thing. I do this podcast in partnership with our hometown team here, the Myrtle Beach Pelicans, our Class A team, just down the street from the station here. And they actually have something in Cooperstown, and it's so appropriate that we would talk about that now. I thought you might want to talk about what that is.
Yeah, it's really neat, and just to take a step back, when people think about the Hall of Fame, they think about the plaques on the wall, and that is a huge part of it. But we are also the repository of baseball history, and that means we have a collection of artifacts, 3-dimensional artifacts, numbering over 40,000. That means we have a museum dedicated to the history of the game and its important stories, 3 floors of museum space and exhibits, numbering at least a dozen. And that's where I get to this piece from the Pelicans. I believe it was August of 2018 when the Pelicans took a really, really interesting step in honoring deaf awareness, and I think it might have been Deaf Awareness Night at the ballpark. They actually had special jerseys made up where instead of text, Pelicans on the front and names in the back being written in English as we'd expect using letters, instead it was American Sign Language. And so representations of how your hand would move to indicate a specific letter, spelling out Pelicans and spelling out the players' names on the back. Really, really neat way of bridging towards a group of baseball fans that might not necessarily always feel like they're a part of the baseball world. A great way to honor those baseball fans and welcome the group towards the game. So a jersey from that game is now here in Cooperstown, a part of our museum collection, and helping us tell the stories of why inclusion is so important in baseball.
with that said, I think we can probably drop a picture of that particular jersey in the pod. It is so cool, man. Just to see, it's really awesome. So maybe in post-production we'll get that in. How did you hear about that jersey and that promotion?
Yeah, really interesting. One of our staffers in our education department, it's kind of a confluence of two of his interests. One is, what's going on in baseball from a cultural diversity standpoint, because that cultural diversity is one of the 16 lessons that we teach in the museum. We actually have a curriculum of education modules numbering 16, whether it's social studies, math, science, teaching through the lens of baseball. That is something that we spend a lot of time and energy on. And he's always looking for what else is happening that should be included, keep those modules up to date. So in terms of cultural diversity and how different groups of people relate to the game, that one really piqued his interest. He's also kind of a baseball jersey logo nerd, so he stays up on all those types of activities. And he brought that to my attention. He said, hey, you guys need to see this. This jersey is being used, and it's different. It's something that's important for the game. Our museum folks, immediately agreed this is something that should be represented here in Cooperstown, so we can document this piece of history, document an instance of baseball being more inclusive. And we actually did some further outreach to see if we could get a second jersey that our education team can use in more of the kind of in-person cultural diversity education modules that we deliver regularly here in Cooperstown. So it's a really great piece. A couple of staff members from the Pelicans came up here a couple months later and actually delivered the uniform pieces in person. And we're kind enough to do a program at the Hall of Fame telling visitors all about the promotion and all the good work that they've done in Myrtle Beach to celebrate Deaf Awareness.
And we should mention, too, that September is Deaf Awareness Month, and a great campaign put on by the Myrtle Beach Pelicans that had a wider reaching effect than they probably thought that it was going to. I am going to have some follow-up questions for Ryan Moore and Kristen Cole up in the head office here in Myrtle Beach, because, I don't know who hand-delivered the pieces there, but you could have UPS ground that stuff and it'd have been there in 3 days. That was an excuse to come to Cooperstown, bro. I know what was happening there, and I was not invited, okay?
Next time you're going to have to get that invite. We're going to need you up here. Because we do have a lot of beer up here and baseball.
Oh, I love it. So that's perfect. I love it, John. I know that we're on a limited time frame today, and I enjoyed the talk about Pedro Martinez, and I typically end these podcasts with some general, basic, slightly rapid-fire type. I wouldn't really call it rapid-fire, but something gimmicky like that. Today, I'm going to go geeky baseball. Is that cool?
That's fine. You're going to expose me, but okay.
No, I'm not, because your wheelhouse is the same as mine. I just called Pedro Martinez the most dominant right-hander of my lifetime. And when I said dominant, I should clarify. Pedro was finesse and power, and as far as getting a strikeout, as far as getting strikeouts in the first 6 2/3 innings of a game, he was about as good as you could get, even there towards the end. But check this out. You've got, we'll say, what's Pedro's prime? 02, 01, 02, 03?
I think you go probably his last year in Montreal, 97, through 03. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So last year, last year in Montreal, Pedro, through 03, Pedro, you've got one game you've got to win. It's a game 7. We're just calling it fictitious game 7. And your lineup is stacked top to bottom, equal number righties, equal number lefties. All right. But it's a gnarly lineup. 90, your other option is like 95, 96, 97 era Greg Maddux. All right. And then your other option is 2000 or like 99 to 2002 Randy Johnson. You got one game to win. Who is it? Who's the guy?
Dude, I'm flipping a three-headed coin there. There's no losing. There's absolutely no losing.
I'm going to take Greg Maddox just because I'm partial to the professor because, well, you know, it's Ted Turner's Superstation. That's just the part of the world I grew up in, man.
Yeah.
And excuse me again. And I'm just going to assume that you're going to take Pedro. No offense to Randy Johnson, even though he did decide to be a Yankee too, which you would probably have taken offense with 20 years ago. Okay. How about this one? I've got another one for you. Two scenarios. And this one you only get you have to have one player, which is the best case scenario. You can build your team around Ken Griffey Jr. in his prime too, which is we're going to say is from Ken Griffey Jr.'s prime is from 1990 to like 2006 or something.
Sure.
Or like whatever.
It's quite a prime. Any time during his career.
Right, at any point. So you have to build your team around Ken Griffey Jr., but here's the caveat. He can't play center field. You got to DH you, okay? Or you can build your team around like 03 to 2012 David Ortiz, and he does have to play first base every day. What's the option?
Dude, this is some high level stuff here. This is high level stuff.
You have to break this down. You're giving up runs in center field with the Griffey team. You're giving up runs at first base with the Ortiz team.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I have a hard time. I have a hard time picking one over the other, and I think again that's the beauty of the game. But Ken Griffey Jr., even if he's not in center field, you could probably put that guy at any position, and he'd be a plus defender. So I'll take 8 Ken Griffey Jr.'s playing anywhere else outside of center field and still feel really good on defense.
I dig that answer entirely. I think that I would go the same way too. We'll just,
but I'd also take a lineup full of David Ortiz's any day as well.
You know what? I will tell you, man. Do you remember? Well, of course you do. You're from Boston, but when he came over from Minnesota, when they made that deal happen, they played him in first base sporadically. This is like the Albert Pujols era where he played third. It's like a time that nobody seems to remember, and Ortiz wasn't necessarily a bad glove at first base. I mean, there wasn't a lot of mobility, but he wasn't making errors.
No, and he would kind of surprise people with a really good play, a really smart play. He knew where to throw the ball and would catch some people off guard. I remember a couple of those instances early in his career at first where you didn't feel uncomfortable with him. But he was duking it out at, when he came over with Jeremy Giambi.
Yep.
And Kevin Millar, a whole slew of guys that were brought in hoping that one of them makes a really good showing and sticks in the lineup. And I would say he did that. It probably took him a month to get enough playing time, but once he did, holy cow. You could have stuck with him at first base if needed, but as it turned out, they had some other folks to get in the lineup, and he made quite an impact for the next decade plus in Boston. It's hard to imagine it's hard to impact-wise with one franchise. It's just pretty incredible what David Ortiz did, the number of magical moments. And again, I was lucky enough to be there for quite a few of them. So I feel very strongly that his impact was among the greatest of any player on any franchise.
Well, his impact in Boston can best be summed up by what is the exact line? This is our effing town. Isn't that the our effing city? Isn't that the line?
Yep.
Yeah, I specifically remember that too. He's meant a lot to the place. All right, I got 2 more questions. I'll let you run, I promise.
All right.
My dad and I have had a healthy debate for basically probably the last 20 years about the most difficult record to break in baseball. And I'm not going to really I don't want to go into like the ways that the game has changed and will a pitcher ever get 300 wins again. We know the game evolves every single day. One record that could easily be chased by somebody but will never be broken is the one that I've been hanging my hat on for like 15 years now, the stolen base record. I think the all-time stolen base record is next to near impossible. I think that Ricky Henderson could steal bases today if somebody would sign him onto a roster. I really believe that. Even at, however, how old's Ricky Henderson? Is he 60? Is he 65? Ricky's old, man.
Yeah, but Ricky's still in good shape, right?
He's got that Herschel Walker thing going on where he's like 65 but looks 35. What do you think the most difficult record to break in baseball is at this point?
I think you're right. I think stolen base is going to be really tough, and it's probably going to take a change in thinking at the baseball ops level of what are we valuing right now for stolen bases to kind of grow back into the mix. So I don't know that it's impossible on that end, but I do think it's going to take some time. It won't be this generation of ball player that breaks that record. It's going to take another generation or two. When I think about unbreakable records, I think about what happened 25 years ago, actually this month, and it was Cal Ripken's streak coming to an end.
The Iron Man streak, yeah.
I guess it was 25 years ago when he broke that record. To me, I think we just look at players differently. We expect them to need downtime. We expect them to need recovery time. Managers aren't pushing players to play every game anymore. And now it's a rarity. Even in this 60-game season, there's only going to be a small handful of guys who play in every one of their team's games, let alone start. So really, to me, that's an entire philosophical change that I think I doubt that one's going to come back to where it was before, where generations and generations it was I'm expecting to be in the lineup and you are expected to play every single day. I see that Ripken streak as unbreakable as it gets.
I should have prefaced by saying that we took the Iron Man streak basically the day it happened, and my dad just pretty much, because we watched on television, right? He walks around the stadium and Camden Yards is going nuts and everybody loves Cal Ripken Jr. I mean, who doesn't? We pretty much looked at the television and we're like, all right, well, you just saw that. That's never going to happen again. I think that you're exactly right. Of the things that could actually be done, I just don't think that's one of them. The last question I'm going to ask you, John, because I know I've kept you for a really long time. I always like to ask folks to drop one of their favorite follows on social media, like point us in the right direction. Somebody that's awesome on Twitter, somebody good on Instagram or Facebook. Who are you following?
Gosh, I'm all up in the baseball world, and I'm not sure I'm going to have much of anything that's different from what you guys are following right now. Gosh, you're really putting me on the spot, Adam.
Everybody says that. I should prepare these podcasts way better than what I'm doing now.
No, I bet usually you get some good stuff out of this. I'm going to have to give a quick scroll through here. My key follows are baseball newsmakers. I mean, that's what I'm looking for when I'm trying to figure out what's going on. My life during the baseball season is very tied into what is happening on the field right now. There are my office deals a lot with, requesting artifacts that need to come here to Cooperstown to document the game's history as it's ongoing, which is what happened with the Pelicans. So I'm constantly looking out for information about, historical context for feats that are taking place. For that reason, I'm just also kind of a stats nerd, and I love, like the Elias Sports Bureau and Stats Inc. feeds that just spout out interesting context for the feats that are taking place on the field. So I probably would steer that direction, but really, I mean, there's some just tremendous baseball writers, and the goal is to keep up to date on them. And if you do so, you won't miss a thing that happens in baseball. And again, for me, it's about documenting history as it happens on the field right now. From Cooperstown, that's what we are. We're documenting so we can tell the stories, share the facts. We're not trying to interpret and say this is better than that, or this is better than that, or, someone should have done something differently. We're here to present the facts. And so I'm always looking for what's happening on the field.
Well, you guys are doing a fantastic job with it in Cooperstown. Pay them a visit. They are open right now, guys, and they're keeping all of Cooperstown safe right now. It has been an absolute pleasure. I'm going to go ahead and request that maybe if we resume some sense of normalcy, that you and I can do this again and maybe talk for longer, Jon.
Hey, I would love it, Adam. I look forward to reconnecting on the podcast. And at some point when time allows and safety allows, I'm sure we'll see you up here in Cooperstown and be able to show you the local breweries as well as some cool stuff here in the baseball.
I'll tell you what, man, Jon, I cannot wait. I cannot wait. Now, I will ask for you specifically. Jon Shestakofsky said that I could come and check this place out and get the behind the scenes.
You'll be welcome anytime. Anytime.
Thank you so much for joining us on Beer and Baseball today. A true pleasure, man. Take care of yourself, okay?
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, and be safe.